WCLN 1170 Radio and Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by J.W. Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We Should Know is on there. I want to thank you for being with us today. It's our pleasure to have on the show Senator Brent Jackson, kind of a regular friend of everybody in Sampson and surrounding counties. Senator Jackson, thank you for being here. This is your fifth term that you're in now as a senator here in North Carolina. You've seen a lot. You serve on a number of very crucial and key committees. One of those committees is Appropriations and Base Budget. You chair that committee. The Agriculture and Environmental and Natural Resources Committee, to name a few. You're a member of the Finance Committee, Judiciary, Redistricting and Elections, Rules and Operations of the Senate, Select Committee on Nominations. That's just the standing and select committees. A lot going on in the world you see, a lot of things you understand clearly that we don't. Help us weave through what's happening today and what's impacting North Carolina.
Well, JW, thank you for having me on here again. It's always a pleasure to be with you and your viewers. And, you know, I appreciate the support that you've given me, as well as all the supporters across my three counties. I really appreciate that as well. We're, you know, as the saying goes, we're in unprecedented times with this pandemic. And I don't think any of us has ever anticipated having this type of a pandemic recession. And it is apparent, based off of what we're seeing from the projections we're being given on the revenue side, that we're going to be down anywhere from $2 to $4 billion. And that number keeps floating around. We're thinking probably somewhere closer in the $3 to $3.5 billion we're going to be short from this pandemic we've gone through. Fortunately, though, for North Carolina, we over the last 10 years, we've built up a rainy day fund, and we're right at $1.2 billion in there. We actually had close to $2 billion until the hurricane came through, and we had two hurricanes really that we spent money on, so we have depleted it some. But we have other reserves available to us as well. So, you know, if we can stay in that $3 billion to $3.5 billion range, North Carolina is going to probably be one of the better states in the nation to face this pandemic recession. But our small businesses are really hurting, as you well know. Our restaurants have really taken a hit. I mean, trying to operate, a lot of them at 50%, you just can't make it at that. And then you have all these other businesses that have not been able to open at all until just recently. The gyms, the movie theaters, as you well know. And as you've probably seen in the news this week, several of the large movie theaters have filed bankruptcy across the nation. And, you know, there is a world of businesses that are probably not going to come back from this pandemic recession, as I'm calling it. We're being told that probably 60% of the restaurants across this state will never reopen to full capacity because they're just not going to be able to make it. But I mean, we're doing the best we can on the state level to make sure that we've got the COVID money out to the counties and to the citizens of this state. And so that's what we're continually working on, is making sure that we use our resources wisely, but that we also, when we come out of this pandemic, we come out on the top side.
So when you talk about the budget, I think one of the things that strikes me is to kind of keep people in touch with where we are in that budget process. We go through that process of appropriation, looking at a budget, actually preparing a budget, approving a budget. Then we go through the process of the expenditure of that budget, which, as I remember, I think it was around 24 billion, the total budget typically is. Where are we at in that process, Senator, as it relates to the budget? Are we in the part where we're looking at the existing budget and we're adjusting as we go forward? Or are we in the process of preparation of the budget, just kind of keeping it simple for, as I tell people, so if I get it, everybody does?
Well, currently, we're not doing anything to the budget. We have tweaked it. You know, we passed a budget bill, the House and the Senate, back in 2019, and the governor vetoed that bill. So we came back in on several occasions and done mini budget bills, we call it. And so what we're doing, because when we done the budget in 18, we have consistently, since I've been involved in budget items, we have done a 2-year budget. We literally could go without doing anything in the second year. And actually, I believe it was 1974 when they started having short sessions, is when they started tweaking the budget some. But prior to that, they didn't even tweak it at all. They wrote a 2-year budget in the long session, and that was it. And I've sort of contended sometimes that might be the best way to do it, because as I always like to say, most of the time the citizens of this state are in much better shape when we're out of Raleigh, because we're not meddling in their lives. But, the budget process overall, we're over a 50-some billion budget, counting the federal money and receipts and all that. I think it's 55 billion and change. Our current budget is at the 24.78 range. Is what we're operating under on state appropriations, and that's the part I have a part in, is appropriating that funds as they come in. But with our revenue shortfall coming in so low this year, it's going to be, as we go back in after the election and go back into January, which we could, just let me pause a moment, we could be called back in by the governor, assuming we get some more COVID money, or we get some more guidance on how to use the COVID money that we've already sort of allocated, and we might have to reallocate some of that as well. But historically, we would probably not go back into January. And the process of that will be that the Senate this time will have the first go at it, and the Senate will work through all the committees in the process, and then we'll pass it and send it to the House. And then the House will work through it and through the same process, and then they'll pass it. And of course, it will be totally different than what the Senate passes. And then the conferees get together, both House and Senate full chairs, and we try and work out the differences. And then we pass it again and on both chambers and send it on to the governor, to be signed and or vetoed in the case has been last couple of times. But, the governor's office normally will put out their budget as well prior to us getting started. And so we do look at it, and we take some of the things that the governor has offered and suggested into consideration when we're doing this process.
One of the things that strikes me is, and I know you probably hear this a lot from folks, is understanding the way the budget is allocated. You oversimplify it if you try to equate it to a personal family household, because it's way more complex. But at the same time, the state budget renders its funds from taxes and resources of fees and other things that is levied on the folks in North Carolina. Do you see any initial need of funds in which the folks in North Carolina would be expected to contribute more to the state budget?
Well, JW, first of all, let me say it will be the last thing that we ever do is raise taxes on our citizens. I mean, that is the worst thing you can possibly do in a recession, from history as well as from the research and studying I have done on this. Raising taxes on our citizens is the worst thing you can possibly do to get closer to a recovery as we move forward. And so, those are things, but we will look at it, and all options, are on the table, so to speak. We will have to do what we need to do. And there are some still, there's still a lot of programs that could be trimmed down, and a lot of agencies that could be curtailed some. But you mentioned the budget as a whole, 57% and change goes straight to education, K through 12. And then, you have like 20% going to DHHS, which is Health and Human Services across the state. And that doesn't leave a whole lot else to do your other agencies, your Department of Ag budgets, Department of Labor, and the Commerce Department, and all those other things has to come out of that remaining percentage that is of the budget. So when all's said and done, predominantly most of it goes to education and healthcare across this state.
When we talk about education, one of the things that often comes up and in that conversation is two things. One, facilities, and the other is increasing pay for teachers. Tell us where we stand.
Well, historically, I think we've given 6 raises to the education teachers, K through 12, in the last several years. And so, we're still looking at that. I mean, we have moved from in the 40th something position up into the 20s as far as paying our educators across the nation. So, but there's a variance of opinions on that because some folks look at it when they take the county supplements into play, but we don't look at the county supplements because, as we well know, Wake County can afford much more supplements than Sampson County can, just because of the population and because of the tax base. And so, but we are trying each year, we do look at teacher raises, and we actually passed a budget bill and 2 other bills for teacher raises, but all those were vetoed by the governor, so we weren't able to get anything across this last time. But it's not from a lack of trying. We done our best to make sure that we looked after our educators on there. And we will continue to look at that as we move forward. And you mentioned facilities. We have a repair and maintenance as well as, capital projects each year. And we try and it's set in statute that we give at least 25% to both of those of what we have available to do that with. And we had implemented a skip program a couple years ago, and we're still trying to get it off the ground. We've had major opposition from the executive branch on trying to do a skip program. And what that skip program, and I'll be very frank with you, is pay as you go. I mean, we were able to save the revenues that we were generating above what was needed for the state, and that was putting it into the area where it could be going into facilities. So there's a lot of facility needs across this state. I mean, billions of dollars, and it's going to take a while to get there.
And I think the important thing that I keep hearing from looking at budgets and listening to our folks that are doing the governance work like you and others is this idea of capital outlay. When we come back, I want you to speak, if you will, there's been some discussion about a statewide bond referendum to build schools. We'll be back. And again, ladies and gentlemen, call a friend. Stay tuned. We're talking with Senator Brent Jackson. We'll be back in one moment.
Experiencing slow internet? If you have a fast internet package, the problem is most likely your wireless router. With more devices using Wi-Fi, your wireless router may not be able to deliver the speed and coverage you need. We now have the leading solution to enhance your internet experience. Using small devices in a mesh network, these Wi-Fi appliances cover just about any size home so that all your devices can operate to their fullest potential. Whole home Wi-Fi from Star Communications. Get the most out of your internet connection.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Wish You Know's on everyone. Thank you for being with us today. As you know, our guest is Senator Brent Jackson, represents Duplin, Johnson, Sampson County. Been doing this job for us in North Carolina here for 5 terms now. Senator Jackson, there's a lot going on. We talked a little bit about the first segment of the show today, the budget and the kind of dynamics of the budget. Zeroing in on that a bit as we went to break. We were discussing education, which, as you pointed out, is 50+% of the state budget. A lot of people maybe didn't realize that. Huge chunk of the state budget. Very important. I think we all agree. There's been discussion about different aspects of what education needs to look at. You addressed a number of those as we went to break. We were talking about the potential for a bond referendum. That opens up a whole nother conversation. I'd like to spend at least part of the time in this next segment to discuss a bit about if that's even feasible, and if it did happen, how that would go about and what your thoughts are on that.
Well, there's a lot of varied opinions on a bond. The Senate has been adamantly opposed to any bond, and we have not changed our opinion on that yet, because that's why we came up with the SKIP program I mentioned earlier in the first segment. Was because we were coming in with revenues above what was needed. We could put that into a program to pay as we go, which would generate hundreds of millions of dollars in just a few short years, and you wouldn't be tying up or obligating the state to some long-term debt. Now, the other argument that is, that interest rates are at historically low, which really makes sense to some to do a bond. But at the end of the day, the SKIP program, the way we had worked on that thing for the last 3 or 4 years before we actually tried to put it into place, was, that we just pay as we go, sort of like a lot of folks do in their households. They sort of pay as they go. And I want to mention one other thing. You mentioned the budget is complicated and big numbers, and more so than a household budget. And it is very complicated. But I just like to remind folks, whether you're dealing with $1,000 or $1 billion, the only thing that is added is zeros. And so you have to mentally work on it as you're working on a household budget and, with limited income. And that's sort of what we're working on is, with limited income without raising taxes. And as I said earlier, we will definitely not be entertaining raising taxes at this point in time. That will be a last resort effort if it comes down to that. But as far as the capital needs in the bond, the governor's office has suggested that we do one. The North Carolina House has suggested they're in favor of doing one. But currently, we've not been able to see where a pathway forward where that's the best way to do it in the Senate. So, take the blame or credit, ever how you want to look at it, but the Senate has been the one predominantly stopping us doing a bond for construction. Historically, the counties have always been the ones that had the authority and the responsibility of building facilities for educational systems. Mm-hmm. And so, there was a number of years ago, decade or two ago, there was a bond run for school construction. But so far, we are trying to work with the counties, but also it is their obligation to do the school buildings. And we have a lot of buildings that have been built in Johnston County because, as you well know, that county has just been growing in leaps and bounds. Sampson County has done some building around as well. And, if we come out now and do a bond, it's sort of, you've put them in a precarious situation, in my opinion. You're not treating them fairly when the citizens of Sampson County are paying for their schools, or Johnston County is paying for their schools. And now we do a bond and they don't need a new school. So it goes to another county that the whole state is paying for. So that, there's a lot of, sort of like a spider monkey. There's a lot of moving parts in this thing that we're trying to work out. But at this point in time, the Senate has not entertained doing a bond.
And I think it's important that we do spend some time on this particular part of the budget, since it is taking up over half of the state budget when we look at education. And that is a big chunk. And it's not just so much the public schools, but we see community colleges, universities, and others as part of that. The system as it's set up, do you feel comfortable with the way our system of education is set up? Do you feel comfortable with where we are moving forward, particularly with what we have learned as a result of COVID, which is simply technology is taking charge and the expectation of technology has ramped up so rapidly?
Well, I think this pandemic has taught us a lot, whether it be in the school systems or whether it be in private businesses, that, a lot of folks are working from home, hence this call today, and this interview today. We've learned that technology can be used very usefully in these cases. And so I think we'll see more of that. There is still a big debate on whether, to open schools up wide open or continually do like some have done. And some systems have tried to open and given the parents the option, but I think that's a parental decision to be made. Mm-hmm. Do they want their kids to go back to school, or had they rather continually do them at home like they've been doing? And I know being at home has put a lot of burdens on a lot of parents to try and work around their schedules and that type of thing. I'm hearing a lot of complaints about the 2 days in and 3 days out. And then I'm hearing a lot of complaints about that, is how that's really not seems to be working as well as just doing it either all inside or in the buildings, or doing it all online. So, there's going to be a lot of discussion still to be continued on this. I mean, this is definitely a work in progress. So I don't see no short answer to it, JW, at this point in time.
Well, when we look at education too, we see that there seems to be an uptick in the number of people making the choice to go to private schools. And that's creating a bit of anxiety with the public education world. I don't know what you've seen. Do you see that statewide, or is it just kind of a local anomaly we're seeing in this part of the state?
No, I think it's a statewide movement, so to speak, because parents are given the choice. I mean, to send their kids to public school, or they can go to a charter school, which is also a North Carolina public school, or they can go to private schools. And so, I think all those options are good, and I think it's up to the parent to choose how they want their children to be educated.
Let's educate folks a little bit about, should I say, healthcare as a whole. COVID splattered right in the middle of that. Rural healthcare was being looked at for years, if not decades, and continues to be looked at. Now we're looking at COVID, and it's highlighted some needs that we have in rural areas. One of those is rural hospitals. Right here in one of the counties you represent, Sampson County, Clinton, the Sampson Regional Medical Center is one of the very few left in the state that we could say is independently owned, a nonprofit. Are we literally looking at a time and place when there will no longer be those hospitals in the state that will all be affiliated? And what does that say to rural America as far as its ability to get to quality medical care?
Well, that is a big issue. And I think there's 15 or 17 county hospitals still in this state. And the rest of them have merged with either like UNC Healthcare or Novant or some of the other ones, bigger systems across. Atrium is one of them across the state. And so, our county seems to have done well with that. But, another issue is too, JW, as I've looked at it, a lot of our folks are citizens, because of our great road systems. I mean, they can be in the Triad area in, an hour to an hour and a half to some of the best health care there is in the world. I mean, the UNC system, the Chapel Hill, Wake Forest, Duke, that is another issue I see too. But rural health care in North Carolina is really, to me, critical. And part of our problem has been trying to get doctors to move into rural North Carolina. And I've started a program along with ECU and Vidant, and they're doing a pilot test, or we'll be here shortly in Duplin County, to try and get residents to move in and stay and become involved in the community. And the hopes of that is to get these doctors and their spouses, whether it be male or female spouses, to move and work with the community and become to love the rural way of life and just stay, because keeping doctors in rural North Carolina is one of our key issues that we have faced for the last 10 years or so. And unless we can make some changes and incentivize these folks to come to rural North Carolina and stay in rural North Carolina, this is only going to get worse instead of better.
The COVID situation seems to be also driving a market of folks that are looking at moving out of the larger cities and municipalities, moving to rural areas. Is that going to be a plus for healthcare, and that some of these folks may decide, well, look, I don't want to stay in a building and the next wall over is somebody and up above me is somebody. I'd like to get out on a farm like where we live.
Well, I think that is the positive of the COVID, that we are seeing people come out of the metropolitan and urban areas and move back into the rural North Carolina, which, as we all know, rural North Carolina could certainly use the economy that comes with that. And so that is one positive that I have seen, is that we are seeing people move more into rural areas, which that creates its own set of problems too when you're working with more people on the highways, and especially agriculture areas, because they don't like getting behind slow moving traffic. So you have the pros and cons of both, but I have seen and been reading articles where folks are moving back into rural North Carolina.
The program you spoke of right quick before we have to go to break, does it incentivize doctors to move to rural areas? Are there financial incentives for that?
There is, and it's through scholarships and part of their residency program.
So maybe somebody that's in medical school now, they could get a process where part of that tremendous bill could be forgiven.
Well, that is true, and that was sort of the deciding point, or some of the points we brought out in trying to get doctors to come to rural North Carolina and stay.
Well, we're
it's
going to
be interesting to see how that program works out.
Absolutely, and we'll follow up with that conversation hopefully in the future. Maybe we'll have some highlights on it. We're going to take our next break. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in a moment. We're talking with Senator Brent Jackson. We ask you to call a friend, stay tuned, and we will be back to clarify some of the issues and additional.
You come out to replace a bad sensor, and that has a 5-year commitment to my contract, and you don't tell me? Here's your sign.
Switch to the sign that's keeping homes secure and customers happy all over the area. Security from Star Communications. We pride ourselves on fair pricing and quick, friendly service every time.
Somebody trying to break into this place?
Security from Star Communications.
Welcome back. J.W. Simmons here. The name of the show is We Should Know. It comes to you on Tuesdays at 2:30. Also, keep in mind, 7 p.m., Tuesday, Thursday, there's a replay of this show. And again, we want to remind you, it's pushed up to the social media platforms as well, so you can pick it up on Facebook, see what's going on in the world as it relates to We Should Know. The complimentary thing that you guys are giving us, that you email us at weshouldknowedu@gmail.com, is that we seem to allow our guests time to explain and to go into detail about some things that oftentimes on some of the other platforms, it's a matter of seconds and they're on to another topic. Today, we've got a person that could explain the day away and talk about subjects because he's been in the middle of it for 5 years, and that's Senator Brent Jackson. In the North Carolina legislature, Senator Jackson, there's nothing really simple up there, is there?
No, there's nothing simple. It's sort of like folks say about making sausage. You know, most folks don't want to see how sausage is made, and most folks don't understand how legislation's made, and that's sort of the joke. It's sort of like making sausage. Sometimes it's not real pretty, but when you get out at the end, you hope you have a decent product.
Absolutely, and having been up there and talked to a lot of you guys on the floor with the legislature, there's to get to that yes or no question and answer oftentimes seems to be impossible.
Well, it does sometimes seems to be impossible. And as I've told folks for years, I says, I can explain to you how it goes. I said, but you'll think I'm lying. So, you know, it's one of those things you sort of have to experience and see firsthand to see how legislation actually comes about. And it's not as some of the media has claimed, you know, it's just overnight or done in dark rooms, that type of thing. You know, a bill has to go through numerous committees on both chambers, and if it starts in the Senate, it goes through several committees and then to the floor for 3 different votes, and then when it goes to the House, it goes through the same process. It's not an easy, simple, overnight process to get things done. But you know, there is a lot of bills we've been able to do over the years, you know, that has, for the most part, I'd say 95% of what we do has bipartisan support. But you never hear about those. It's the 5% that we don't agree on that becomes partisan issues that you hear about.
And I think that's probably part of the process itself, is this deliberation. And the way our government was set up is to have this, should I say, lively debate and discussion about things. But the reality is, the one thing that we know for sure, whether it's technology or we're talking about education, the thing that just comes to the forefront is that we all have to have food. We all have to have something to consume when we sit at our tables, and agriculture in this state is what's driving that market. And Senator Jackson, you know that since you're a successful business person in the world of ag, you stepped into this world of should I say, politics, and looking at what's going on in government to kind of help move that dinner table meal forward. Where is ag in all this conglomeration of things that we see going on now, and everything from masks to television now via Zoom and all these kinds of things? Ag still comes from the field, and it comes from various locations. A lot of folks see only our local grocery stores or our big grocery stores. They don't see that person in that field.
Well, that's true. And, you know, it all goes back. I tell folks, you know, good, bad, or whatever, it all rolls back down to the soil and back to the farmer that growed it. And, you know, I think this pandemic we've gone through has shown how important agriculture is to, one, feeding our country and our state, of course, as well as our national security. I mean, I've always thought that food and agriculture was as much a part of the national security as our military is, and they have to work hand in hand to make sure we have both. And I'll borrow one of Commissioner Troxler's lines. He says, "Hungry people are mean people." And, we don't want to get to that point, but this pandemic has pointed out just how quick it takes or how little it takes of time for our grocery store shelves to be empty. And but agriculture has been fortunate that we were deemed a necessary business, and so we've been marching on forward and doing what folks do on the farms. And the demand has certainly been up because of this pandemic. And I think a lot of that is because so many restaurants were closed. Now, if predominantly your business was restaurant trade, you've been hurt along with the restaurants. But a lot of these growers that do a lot of restaurant trade have been creative and opened up, agritourism spots that has really boomed. As we've seen, most agritourism spots are just booming right now because people are just raring and been shut up so long and tightened down, I guess, that they're just eager to get out and experience something else different. And that's what we're seeing, not only in agriculture, but you're seeing it in our parks. I mean, our parks are overflowing every weekend because of people trying to get out from being cooped up so long. But agriculture is still our number one industry. It's at $94 billion that ag and agribusinesses bring into this state each year. And so I continually see it growing. Commissioner Troxler set a goal a number of years ago to get to $100 billion, and I really believe he's going to get there, or will get there, very soon. But ag is one of the issues that is discussed a lot in the General Assembly, and I feel like over my 10 years there, or 5 terms, that we have brought ag to the forefront again. And I think this pandemic, we were positioned because of policies we've put in place over the last several years to have ag so it could be ready to get and go when this struck, even though we weren't planning for this type of pandemic experience.
Well, talk a little bit about the regulation issue with agriculture. I know when you went into the Senate and took on this job, one of the things that you wanted to look at, and there's a couple of committees you're on that does look at that, is a lot of the regulations that oftentimes become impediments to farmers and to others out there.
Well, regulations are needed that are reasonable, but we have so many on the books over the years, and we've eliminated a lot of those. And we've put a lot of policies in place to make sure that when an agency creates a new regulation, that it is something that is definitely needed and not just something that come up in the middle of the night they thought would be great to do. But regulations can impede businesses and agriculture more than anything possibly can. And with ag, you have to deal with the weather, but as policy is what sets the future of ag, in my opinion. And that's what I've tried to do. And that's what I've told my colleagues over the years in working on ag legislation is we're just trying to bring our legislation and our policies into the 21st century. And that's what I've spent a lot of my time doing as well.
Well, one of the things that often comes up with folks, especially in the agriculture community, and you touched on it a while ago, is roads and transportation. You're exactly right. We see a lot of roads around Raleigh, a lot of interstates and those kinds of things. But our farming communities, again, you're right in the middle of this, so you're very clear on this, is not on interstate. You go down a country road somewhere, and most of our country roads are really in pretty bad shape. And DOT has gone through a major, I won't use the word crisis, but they've gone through a budget situation. I'll let you speak to it. Where are we at as it relates to getting some more focus on our roads and maintaining our roads?
Well, transportation is a key issue for the farmers as well as most everybody else. But I mean, you're right, JW. Our roads have been ran down or potholed or whatever you want to call for a number of years. And we've tried to work on getting these secondary roads back up to speed and to par, so to speak, as well as our bridges. And there are a lot of bridges being worked on in this county, in Sampson County, I know right now, because I get the complaints of folks having to go around those detours. But, those are necessary things that hadn't been done in decades. And we have so many bridges in this state that are outdated and need repair. but they are getting to it. It's not a fast process, as you well know, but we have got to continually maintain our roads. And you mentioned the DOT's budget crisis, and it was a crisis. They are working through it, and it's getting somewhat better. And we anticipate by, spring, they should get back to doing contracts and sort of get somewhat back to full speed ahead. But we've had to make some policy changes in some of the overview that is done on the budget issues at the Department of Transportation. And we have worked on that, and we've passed several bills in the last few months on that. And so we're hoping that will work. But we've got a bigger problem that we've got to face with DOT. The gas tax is not sufficient anymore to maintain what we've got or to continually to build. So there has got to be some serious thought put into how do we start funding DOT and its projects. And none of those options do not appear to me to be very likable at the time. And some of it is just a pure tax for DOT other than the gas tax, because as we know, the newer vehicles get much better gas mileage than the older vehicles did. And that is cut down. And with the electric vehicles coming into play, so to speak, that's even going to reduce it even more. So we have got to figure out a new formula for revenue streams coming into DOT for the long term.
How hard is that going to be in the market we're in now, particularly because it looks like this COVID thing is going to go into spring of 2021? A lot of folks have already put that out there. How hard is that going to be to come up with these new ideas on how to fund DOT to insure roads? And maybe that's something we'll have to, once you start to answer that question, we're probably gonna have to segue it over to our next segment, because I really want to get into that.
Okay. Well, there is thousands of thoughts out there on how to do it, but it is not going to be an easy process at all. And it's going to take some folks that are really dedicated to working on this. And fortunately, we have some folks in the General Assembly that really are dedicated to transportation and understand it. So I'm confident at some point in time we will come up with something, but it's not going to be no easy process.
Absolutely. Well, when we come back, I'd like to kind of get into that whole area of the carbon footprint and some of the things that we see that are almost imaginary for many people. Talk about that a bit and how it's going to impact the budget. Ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. We'll be back in a moment. We're talking with Senator Brent Jackson, talking about your business in Raleigh.
To get the most out of your electronic devices, you need a strong internet connection and a protected home Wi-Fi network. You need high-speed internet from Star. Star has the fastest, most affordable high-speed internet service available for all your devices. We have no long-term contracts or high-pressure sales. Our service speaks for itself, and switching is hassle-free. We take care of everything with free installation from a local company. High-speed internet from Star. Internet at the speed of life.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I want to thank you for being with us today. Remember, you can reach us at weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you from shows we've had, suggestions about shows we should have. Keep in mind these shows are aired on WCLN Radio, Star Communications Channel 16, at 3 different times: 2:30 on Tuesday, 7 p.m. Tuesday, Thursday, in case you haven't happened to miss the Tuesday afternoon show. It's also uploaded to social media platforms at YouTube and others, so look for it there. We're talking with Senator Brent Jackson, representing 3 counties, Duplin, Sampson, and Johnston counties, District 10. Senator Jackson, General Assembly, is with us today. We talked about a lot of stuff, Senator Jackson, coming down to that last segment. And I almost, as I opened the page on this world here of carbon footprint, and I know you're a member of the Ag, Environmental, Natural Resources Committee and in the Senate, and I'm sure that that committee is looking at a lot of these issues. We hear carbon footprint. We hear global warming. Help us understand the expectation, because we're also hearing reducing to a 0 carbon footprint. And when we hear that, that means fossil fuels are going away. You were just talking about DOT and roads and taxes. There's a number that we will not be able to get to today, issues that will impact. Tell us what some of those priority issues that you see that this movement to a 0 carbon footprint is going to impact.
Well, JW, I think zero carbon footprint is an ideal goal to be reaching for. I don't see it obtainable in the near future without just completely redoing our whole economy and the way things are set up to be. You know, California just recently passed a proposition, you know, to ban fossil fuel by, I can't remember the date, but I've already been reading articles where that's not even possible. You know, and I'm a full believer in that we need fossil fuels, but I'm also a full believer we need alternative methods as well, whether it be solar or wind or whether it be battery storage, that type thing. I think it takes it all to make it work, but I don't think you can tie all your eggs in one basket, so to speak, in this issue. I mean, because we have, you know, I can't see any time in the near future having electric farm tractors, you know, but, you know, it's coming. I really believe it is coming, because if you'd asked me 20 years ago, would it be auto steer tractors, I'd have said you were crazy. But, you know, they've been around a number of years and working really well on a lot of operations now. I think in that same light and that train of thought, I think what you're going to see eventually is you're going to see tractors without operators, because it's going to be operated basically by the GPS systems as well as the satellites. And labor, of course, is a big issue when it comes to agriculture and any business. I mean, labor is the number one issue with most small businesses or big businesses, either one. But, you know, this carbon footprint thing is in my opinion, is a reality that we need to try and reduce, because I really believe most of us, especially in rural areas that work on the soil or work with the soil, and we work with the environment, you know, we are the environmentalists. We're the ones that we want to make sure our water's safe. We want to make sure our food's safe. And to do that, we have to put in new technology, and there is a lot of new technology coming about and has been coming about for several years now in agriculture. I think that's one of the most exciting things in talking with folks that I've seen there. You take someone from the city that doesn't understand ag, but when you get to talking to them about the new technologies that are being used today, as well as what's coming in the future, they get really excited. And, you know, I think that's a good thing. And it ties our sort of our urban neighbors and our rural neighbors together. That, you know, there is a common goal there, that we're doing something to help protect the environment, but as well, we're doing something even more importantly, we are feeding a hungry world. And so I really believe, you know, that it will all come together at some point in time, but I don't know that it'll be in the year 2025 or 2030. But I mean, as we move towards that, and we can make it sustainable. And I go back to something my son said one time in talking about sustainability. He said the first thing to a farm operation being sustainable is you've got to make a profit. And that's true for any business. If you want to be sustainable, you've got to make a profit. And, you know, but at the same token, is we can take steps to get a little closer to these goals that have been set up, because I believe a lot of these goals have been set up as lofty goals, as I like to call them. They can be attainable, but at some point in time, you have to work the economy or economics of how much does it cost to obtain it. And so you have to work sort of hand in hand and use some common sense to get to these places.
And that kind of goes into that next thread of not only looking at that, but what happens to the revenue as we kind of look at altering our process of fossil fuel. One of the things I know Steve Troxler pointed out was as we see these solar farms going up, that's taking up huge swaths of farmland as well.
It is. There is a lot of land being used for solar farms. I know where there's a farm right now that's some of the best farmland there is in my area that's going in a solar farm. And I think, you know, we've got to look at alternative methods, but I think we've got to be wise about where we put them. And we've also have got to be wise about how much taxpayer dollars is being expended to get these things in place. And it's sort of a fine line that I have found myself having to walk in many times since being in the General Assembly, because I've always felt like I was a forward-thinking person, and I really believe in these alternative methods as long as they're economically viable and that taxpayers aren't funding them. That to me is a big key. I mean, and that's one reason we done away with the tax credits several years ago in North Carolina. These businesses need to stand on their own. But I also want to go back and say, JW, fossil fuels has been subsidized for many, many, many decades and still being subsidized over several $billions a year on nationally. And so it's subsidizing some of these alternative energies is not a new thing. It's been around since the fossil fuels started, but we're getting less. We're getting more pressure to get away from fossil fuels. So we've got to be looking at alternative methods, and I think there's a lot of research being done out there today that a lot of folks are not aware of on how we're going to get there. But I'll back up to what we were talking about in the previous segment. It gets back to the DOT revenue. We have got to figure out a new formula to get funding to DOT if we're going to be able to continually work on our roads and build new roads into the future.
What do you see? Is there some kind of possibilities of funding DOT that would not be just going to citizens and saying, give us more money? Is there a way to do that would enhance DOT and allow roads to be looked at in a more prosperous way? And of course, I know you hear this all the time, and ditches to be cleaned out so we can have, fields that are drained better and that kind of thing.
Well, one of the things that have been looked at is putting when you go get your registration or you buy a new vehicle, you pay a fee right then and charging by the vehicle. Putting a fee on I'll just use an example, $10 a vehicle, for every vehicle you have, you pay that every year and it would go straight to DOT for road maintenance and that type of thing. So there's a lot of things out there that are being discussed. I mean, we've tried to pass a bill to actually start charging the electric vehicles a tax, but that's got vetoed on numerous occasions. But I mean, they're using the road as much as a gasoline vehicle is, so they need to be paying their fair share, and currently they're not paying any. So we've got to make sure that everybody is pitching in their part when it comes to the DOT funding.
And I think one of the things we could, of course, get into a whole nother discussion, and we just don't have time today to get into it, but the whole aspect of one thing you do, something else happens. And a lot of these electric vehicles and batteries and these kinds of things, solar farms, they come with residual impacts because these things do not last forever, and you got to do something with the byproduct.
Well, we passed a bill this past session in the General Assembly that forces these solar companies and wind companies to clean up and put bonds in place to make sure the money is there to clean these facilities up. There's several trains of thoughts with the solar panels. Some of them say the precious metals in them are far better, are worth more to do the recycling. And then there's some that thinks it harms the soil, but there's no data to really back that up on there. But this is an issue that you have folks buried, I guess, in silos on each of their sides, and it's trying to get everybody sort of a happy medium there to make this thing move forward. But I feel, I can't say enough that, I think the farmland there's been some really good farmland put in solar farms that was unnecessary. But at the same token, with the battery storage coming online and finally getting up to speed, I think this is a game changer for the solar industry where they can store that into the batteries and then use it and put it into the grid. And there's been a lot of work done on that of mixing the methane gas things that, we're doing with some of the livestock facilities, as well as with the solar and some other alternative energies, the biomass type things, and then with the batteries part of it, it makes it more reliable for a grid to go to the grid and be used. But there's a tremendous debate on everything that goes along with this alternative energy, as well as the funding of DOT. But eventually we'll get there, and I'm sure whatever comes up is not going to be perfect, as some folks like to say, because since I've been there, I've not seen a perfect piece of legislation. I've seen some good legislation, but I've not seen a perfect piece, because there's always unintended consequences that you run across occasionally in doing that.
Every piece that's moved has an impact on the other piece somewhere down the road.
Well, think it as a balloon. If you push in on one side, it's going out somewhere. So that's sort of the way a state budget is. If you push here, it's got to go somewhere else.
Well, we're coming up on our last few seconds here. I want to thank you for being with us today, and just let you know we look forward to having you back in the future, whether it's Zoom or in real person.
Well, thank you, JW. I appreciate you having me today. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
See you again next week on We Should Know. God bless.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host J.W. Simmons. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion regarding this or any episode, please send your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.